I walked through the restaurant doors at exactly the right time. Not a minute early, not a second late. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was off. Every plate had been cleared. Wine glasses sat half empty, dessert dishes were piled at the edge of the table, and 13 other people were leaning back in their seats with the relaxed expressions of people who had just finished a long, satisfying meal, without me. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, spotted me from across the room. A slow smirk spread across her face. She reached forward, picked up a folded piece of paper, and slid it deliberately across the table toward me. Then she said something I will never forget. "Go ahead and handle this. You're basically the family bank anyway." The entire restaurant fell into an uncomfortable silence. My son, Ethan, dropped his eyes to the tablecloth and kept them there. I unfolded the paper. It was a bill for over $2,000. They had eaten, celebrated, and toasted the night away, and apparently decided before I even arrived that I would be the one picking up the tab. Any other version of me, from any earlier point in my life, would have quietly pulled out a card and paid without a word. But something shifted in that moment. A line inside me that had been bending for years finally broke clean through. I said nothing. I picked up the bill, tore it into small pieces, and let them scatter across the table. Then I stood up, turned around, and walked straight out the door. That dinner was not the starting point of the problem. It was simply the first time I could no longer pretend the problem did not exist. For years, I had been quietly propping up Ethan and Vanessa's life. I owned a duplex, and they had been living in the entire upper unit without paying a single dollar in rent. On top of that, I covered utility bills, stepped in during financial emergencies, helped with their car payments, and handed over loans that were never mentioned again after the money changed hands. I kept telling myself it was what family did. I believed I was building something for them. The night I got home after leaving that restaurant, I opened my files and started reviewing every dollar I had spent on them over the past 3 years. The total, when I finally finished calculating, was more than $58,000. Nearly $60,000 had quietly drained from my savings because I kept stepping in to rescue 2 grown adults who had never once been pushed to rescue themselves. While I was still staring at that number, my phone lit up with a message from Vanessa. "You embarrassed us tonight? Let us know when you're ready to apologize." I actually laughed out loud, not because anything was funny, but because the audacity of it genuinely stunned me. They believed, without any hesitation, that I was the one who needed to make things right. That was the moment I stopped operating on feelings and started making decisions. I canceled every automatic transfer I had set up for them. I removed Vanessa from my credit card. I blocked both of their numbers. For the first time in years, I was no longer funding someone else's comfort at the expense of my own. The peace did not last long before the noise started. Neighbors began stopping me with cautious looks on their faces, asking gentle questions about whether I was doing all right. It turned out Vanessa had been spreading a story through the neighborhood that I had suffered some kind of emotional episode at the dinner and was struggling. Rather than fight it, I simply smiled. The people who actually knew me did not need convincing. But the whole thing made it very clear just how far she was willing to go to keep her version of events alive. About a week later, Ethan showed up at my front door. Vanessa was right behind him, arms crossed, expression tight. He told me I could not just cut them off. They had been depending on that support. Those words landed harder than he probably realized. It was not about losing a relationship with me. It was about losing access to what I could provide. I told them both calmly and directly that the financial support was finished. They were working adults. It was time for them to carry their own weight. Vanessa called me cruel and selfish. A few years earlier, those words would have sent me spiraling into guilt. That evening, they meant absolutely nothing. Then things took a turn I was not prepared for. My bank called me. A representative explained that someone had submitted paperwork requesting full authorization over both my checking and savings accounts, claiming I had granted Ethan legal financial control. The employee had caught inconsistencies in the documents and was calling to verify before proceeding. A cold, heavy feeling settled over me as I told them clearly that I had never signed anything of the sort and that the paperwork was fraudulent. The next morning, I went to the bank in person. One look at the signature on those documents was all I needed. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Ethan's. My own son had attempted to forge his way into my life savings. That particular wound went deeper than any of the others. I secured every account I had and made certain nothing like it could ever happen again. When I got home, Ethan was waiting. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not offer an explanation or an apology. He asked me why I had blocked it and told me they needed that money. The fact that he was more focused on what he had lost than on what he had done said everything. I handed him an envelope. Inside was a letter detailing a new arrangement. Starting the following month, he and Vanessa would be responsible for their portion of utilities and building upkeep. If they refused, they would need to find other housing. Vanessa appeared within moments and declared that I would never throw family out. I looked at her steadily and told her the house was mine, and the decision was mine to make. She could contribute or she could leave. For once in a very long time, she did not have a comeback. Over the weeks that followed, their lifestyle changed visibly. The spontaneous purchases vanished. The talk of vacations went quiet. The reality they had been outrunning finally caught up with them at full speed. One afternoon, Ethan came to me alone. He looked like someone who had not slept properly in weeks. He told me the truth about where they stood financially. Vanessa had been running up significant credit card debt and financing things on borrowed time. They had been spending freely because they had always assumed, without ever saying it directly, that I would eventually absorb the damage. When my support ended, the whole structure they had built caved in. I asked him the question that had been sitting with me since the bank visit. Why did he forge my signature? He looked at the floor for a long moment before answering. Vanessa had backed him into a corner. She had told him she would leave if he did not find a way to get money. He knew it did not excuse what he did. He just ran out of ways to keep the truth at arm's length. 3 months later, they moved out of the upstairs unit. I found a new tenant shortly after, a retired teacher named Grace, who valued quiet evenings and steady routines just as much as I did. The moment they left, something in the house changed. It breathed differently. So did I. 6 months passed. My savings began to recover. I started planning a trip to the coast that I had been pushing back for years. For the first time in a long time, my days felt like they belonged to me again. Then Ethan called. His voice had changed. The defensiveness was gone. He told me he owed me a real apology, that they had used me, and that he understood that now. It was the first honest thing I had heard from him in years. He also told me that he and Vanessa had separated. Once the financial lifeline disappeared, it turned out there was not much else holding them together. I felt genuinely sad for him. But I also knew that some lessons cannot be handed to a person. They have to be lived through. As I finished packing for my trip, I thought about everything the past year had cost me and everything it had given back. For a long time, I believed that loving someone meant making every sacrifice they asked of you. What I finally came to understand was something much harder and much more important. Love that has no limits does not protect the people you care about. It teaches them that you can be taken for granted indefinitely. The night I tore up that dinner bill, I was not making a scene. I was drawing a line. I was choosing myself for the first time in years. And every single day since then has confirmed that it was exactly the right thing to do.